Hey, everybody. This is Dan Baird, and this is Wrench.ai's session for Rev Tech Summit in 2023 on AI content and avoiding messaging mistakes at scale. So thank you, Signals, for allowing us to kind of speak again today. We totally appreciate it. Humbled. And for those of you that don't know me, I'm one of the founders here at Wrench.ai. I'll tell you a little bit more about them in a second. But my background is largely in product innovation and new product development. My job in many companies has been to build new product platforms, and that means segment new populations, build messaging and positioning recommendations, develop personalized content and other things to basically help people. Everything from I was one of the founders at Lovesac, building beanbag chairs, where we tried to personalize and actually use a lot of foot traffic patterns to figure out how to ideally lay out retail stores. I worked at ConAgra on Hunts and Healthy Choice and Orville Redenbacher, developing new platforms there and sitting behind one-way glass, understanding, all right, how do people interact with product? How do they decide what to buy, what matters to them? And worked in the equity crowdfunding and investment space to help people understand how do we build compliant checkouts? How do we display these new assets like commercial real estate and other things online that haven't been available via that platform before? And now with Wrench, developing basically AI insights for, amongst others, ABM teams that win. So Wrench's job is largely to take a lot of the digital exhaust that's inside your CRM and unlock its value. We do enrichment. We kind of basically take that, combine it with your CRM data, and basically go and mine it for, okay, who is this customer? How do we segment them? What matters to them? And how do we actually engage them? And that's with channel recommendations, messaging recommendations, and other completely custom models. So we can build like lead scores, product recommendations, churn recognitions, and things of that nature that actually kind of adapt your message to your recipient because it's important. The reason, and this kind of gets into the AI content, is that it pays to personalize. And the thing that a lot of these aren't realizing, it's a kind of a recurring theme, is actually you need to watch your end users like a living and growing, and it's an audience that moves and changes and develops its own kind of mind. Right now, you are seeing the cost per acquired customer go up, all of you. I know you are. All of the data battles that are going between like Apple and Google, these walled gardens where they have their own kind of data sets and they're trying to protect them from everyone except themselves, is basically increasing the cost per acquired customer on the top side of the funnel with PPC channels and things like that. And a lot of people are now focusing on their own CRMs because they know that there's a lot of product interaction and they haven't used it yet. A ton of it is just like, hey, we put first name and last name in. And a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, we were seeing a lot of like marketing automation, which looked great on the surface, but the same thing. People went, oh yeah, we can put first name and last name. And then they didn't realize how many messy mistakes were in just first name and last name. Like, I don't know about you, but for many people, I change my first name for every marketing list that I get added to, so I know who sold my data or how to help spot those who are real from those aren't, right? The recurring theme again is that it's not you, the person making the noise on one end of this dyad of this conversation. It's the recipient and what they hear being unique that matters. Say it with me. It's what people hear and it being unique is what matters, and it pays. Again, some of these numbers are from 2018, which is old, man, 4 or 5 years old. Like post-pandemic, they've gone up substantially. But like revenues between 25 and 40% from personalizing your interactions. You can increase your marketing spend and efficiency. You can reduce acquisition costs pretty substantially. When we run a lot of the data fields, we take kind of an interaction, go into a client, process their list. Who were customers? Who were prospects that never converted? Who churned? What are all their traits? We can put them into the equivalent. I'm oversimplifying here. But if we take all that data and we combine it into clusters and say, okay, how much of that data was associated with the content or the variant or the SKU? How much of that data was associated with the recipient's personality or their interest in the product or brand affinities, demographics, psychographics, all that fun stuff? This is that list that you get. It comes back and it basically says, okay, of all the data features that we were tracking, these are the ones that rose to the top and proved to be the most interesting. Obviously, the way you describe your product being about 33-ish%, and again, this can change a little bit depending on which product you're working on, but it's a viable example. The content and product insight, what you say actually matching with their interest is actually really what matters, right? Those trigger keywords and product variants. I mean, that's the reason that people have multiple SKUs for a lot of like e-commerce products and things like that, is they need to make different flavors, different colors, because it satisfies a larger proportion of the population. Not everybody's into vanilla, right? So it matters. But simultaneously, if you go in, you can look at the personality traits, product adoption. And basically, again, that's measuring product adoption, and brand affinities are kind of like measuring someone's interest in your technology or your product. And by segmenting those into different buckets, you can increase the likelihood of conversion again. So this kind of comes back to, it matters to the recipient. It's not that you come up with one perfect message. It's that you can build a message that can adapt to different populations that have different levels of interest, different personalities as they hear it. That's that trick. So AI content potentially makes this really attractive because, it's not just marketing automation where we can chain together campaigns and we can put people's first name and last name into the text all of a sudden. Theoretically, we should be able to actually personalize that content, right? Yeah, yes, right. So, but be careful. So as far as the AI content goes, when you're building it in and you want to write that personalized content, you need to know a little bit about where that data comes from and how it's used and how it is experienced from your recipient's standpoint. So first things first is I want you to remember that the AI content that you're getting in most cases is, one, driven by the quality of the prompt, which is not an insignificant amount of work anyways. But also the fact that oftentimes, especially if you're pulling it straight out of like GPT-3, is that it's kind of the equivalent of an average. Its job isn't to think up the best possible cold email sequence you could ever come up with. It's kind of taking all of the examples of cold email sequences that it was able to find on the web and averaging them together based off their shared traits and definitions of what defines a cold email, right? So it's not like it went into everybody's inboxes and actually figured out what worked for each of those individuals. It read the publicly available web. It read HubSpot blogs. It read LinkedIn blogs that were describing cold email sequences. It's averaging those together, and even if I've seen prompts where people were putting in like, hey, include statistics or cite a data set or something like that. They blend them, right? So it may take one says 0 and another says 100 and it returns 50 because that's the average of the two. It's not exactly how it works, but it's the reason that your Google search chief is warning on the right-hand side of your screen here that they can give you completely fictitious answers, because it isn't like checking its work, and it isn't like making sure that it cites its in its footnotes and using all of its perfect citation methodology for statistics and everything else like that. It's returning kind of an average of repeated occurrences that it's seeing. And then finally, the training data that underlies it is potentially able to work against you. So I've seen a lot of people that are using it for SEO, thought leadership, and other pieces, which is great, but I would say think about it again as an average. Its job is to get you a good baseline with coherent prose and minimize grammatical errors and things like that. But you should spin it and you should customize it much, much further from there. The example being, again, like Google is basically, OpenAI has already released an API endpoint to detect if content was generated by AI, likelihood of being created by AI content generators. On top of that, the IP, if you haven't seen these as well, Midjourney is being sued for basically using a lot of Getty images. And if you type in the tags or the title associated with a very specific image, you can oftentimes pull it up, including the watermark from Getty Images, which basically proves that algorithm was trained using data and images that were copyrighted, including even pulling up their watermarks. They weren't licensed for commercial use, and therefore they're in violation of it. The same kind of premise kind of happens potentially with you if you take it to, say, write a book. Potentially that book is not protectable by copyright because by definition, it was reading a bunch of other articles and content pieces and then averaging those together. It was not original work by definition. So be careful. And when you're using it, think about it again as this is an opportunity to get to the average really quickly, and then use that to further customize or add novel insights from your prompts that give you a really unique response that other people wouldn't have. One more over on this. It's about that recipient population, because say you get clever, we write a prompt that basically says, hey, I want you to write a cold email to the CEO of Wrench.ai. And it does likely know what Wrench.ai is, right? Even though some of those data sets and training data sets can be 2 years old and things like that. We've been around for 5 years, so it would know who we are. It'll pull up and write a cold email for that CEO, and it will look very unique to you, especially if you drop it into like a spreadsheet and you have like CEO of Signals, CEO of Wrench. It will customize a little bit of those answers to each, but the recipients, if multiple salespeople are giving the same prompt and the same premise on readily available data like job title and company name like that, it's very likely that they're receiving damn near the same cold outreach email from several different sources, which may mean it looks unique to you, the sender, but it actually isn't to the recipient. And they're seeing it over and over and over, and they're getting nauseous because, as an example, everyone's mentioning the mascot from my college about a month ago, right? These are noticeable. So watch out when you're actually generating that content. And the reality is you need to focus on the recipient. So here's kind of another kind of case study and example from kind of the Signals world. We work with Signals. We've done some of their segmentation. They actually take and use a lot of Wrench data in their own kind of marketing efforts. And the methodology and why some of that recipient stuff matters is we've proven that it was showing up pretty high on their feature weight lists, right? We've got product adoption. We've got brand affinities. These are kind of like saying, what is someone's interest in our technology? So personality, you can go out there. We can do it for you. I think there's other people that do it as well. Ours is best, by the way, though, so just call us. But you can do it yourself as well. I mean, this is stuff that if you start digging into each individual and you're actually looking through their posts, you can start to deduce this and what's significant to them. That it's not that challenging. If you're looking for product and brand affinity, we're using those, and we think about those on it's kind of called like an adoption curve, technology adoption curves. This is kind of like taking your total addressable market, everybody that you could potentially sell to in your category, and then putting them kind of on a bell curve where you go, okay, there's the people on the front end. Those are innovators and experts. These are people that are like inventors. If you're developing brand new, innovative product, you're probably up there, and you probably know who they are. Really small proportion of your population. Those are the people that understand the vision. They love talking about it. They can't get enough. There's the influencers. These are thought leaders that aren't necessarily getting their hands dirty building product, but they have larger followings and they talk about it a lot. You've got the early adopter group. This is where kind of like you have that larger segment that is less price sensitive, more likely. Just think, who are the people that are willing to stand in line for our product? That's them. You've got your late adopters where you start to see, okay, these people need a little bit more education. It's not like they're sitting there and following us all day, every day. They're usually asking more and more focused on discounts. And then finally, in short, your laggard population, those ones almost make their decisions almost exclusively based on price, or think about it as they buy when they have to. They usually don't buy before then, or someone else makes them go buy. If you are in your calls, you're doing demos, conversations, if you're doing in prospecting, and you go, wait a minute, today I had that perfect call, and then I used the same basic script and premise, and it worked and it failed miserably. A day later, it isn't necessarily like just the reality is you probably don't have the one perfect message, because there probably isn't one. You're probably talking to people from very different ends of this adoption curve. And don't beat yourself up about it. You still need to refine them. But the trick for you is not to find the perfect way to describe it so everyone gets it. It's how to describe it for the audience in front of you. So again, you have to think about your recipients, and you actually have to think a little bit more about, okay, how do we customize this experience based on generally those segments that are more likely to be in your population. So with Signals, this is what we were doing, taking their population, uploading and connecting to their Salesforce, enriching their data, and then doing about an hour and 15 minutes worth of research per person using that AI to help automatically subsegment which people in their database were in each of these groups so that they can build campaigns that are more adapted to them, right? The innovators and the early adopters, they already know the jargon. They already kind of get the vision. They're much easier to convert and to get to a decision just because they're much more educated on who the other competitors and alternative options are and what you can and cannot do with it. It's a lot easier for them to kind of get to a decision there. There are a bunch of custom campaigns that they can do with each group as well. But again, it requires understanding and looking for kind of those signals that will be embedded in your user population and customizing your content for them. So again, it's not about what you say. It's about what you say and where they are when they hear it, how interested they are, and what groups they're from. So again, don't be building one size fits all prompts. It doesn't work. It didn't work 5 years ago when marketing automation worked. Didn't work 5 years. I mean, that hasn't worked for 20, 30 years, right? It's only getting and requiring more and more personalization as we kind of mature. So the trick is, it's not how much you can say quickly. It's how quickly and intelligently you can hear and then customize your prompts and your content based on it. This is kind of like just the final example of kind of what you can see in apologies, Signals peeps. They started and created their account with us, year, 2 years ago. I don't know how long ago, but when they were still branded as chat funnels. So pardon me if you see it in here. But this is kind of some of the data where they uploaded their 7,000 contacts connected to Salesforce. It enriched it. It looked at their LinkedIn bios. It looked at a bunch of their interests and other things that they're posting publicly, and then cross-reference that with chat funnels to understand, all right, for Signals, but who is actually the most affiliated, talking about this stuff the most, who has the most in common with us. And then Wrench is automatically kind of segmenting each of those populations to say, okay, cool, here's them, here's their bio, analyze that content to understand what are they saying, what are they talking about, like ROI. The AI in this context is using it to interpret what they say and then customize the recommendations going forward so they can build something based on, hey, which products are they most interested in? What messaging recommendations make the most sense for this individual, or even what kind of their personality is. And so we can adapt to that without having to start and do 20 to 30 minutes usually is what the average SDRs are doing in research on a kind of B2B basis. So this can kind of automatically recognize that and then even summarize it. So it's doing that, all that 7,000 kind of individuals on research, cross-referencing the data, and it can actually even do some stuff to start to figure out, hey, if we're doing that messaging, what makes the most sense? Can we cross-reference the populations, reload, for a specific trigger of budget reallocation? Which people are very much focused on the dollars, which people are focused on customer satisfaction, and can we cross-reference those and start to see, hey, are there populations within our audience that are more or less interested in those, where we can say, hey, this is a person where, kind of like a product recommendation, reach out to this group for budget reallocation, right? You can see on the x-axis here. So their budget reallocation group kind of maxes out at about 47 here. And their chat funnels marketing directors, right? Their target population, where they're talking about marketing budgets and other things, are more prominent within their population, and they can use that and actually have higher hit rates and more adoption because they're talking more to people that are affiliated with being the marketing directors. So they can use that and start to understand, how do we talk to each group? It's got the channel priorities and messaging strategies as well, can recognize their influencers based on, people that have been involved in journalism versus celebrity influencers. And again, give them some of those recommendations on what to say. This is kind of where kind of the crux of their data insights came in, is the personality types are split into two groups, obviously many, many groups, but the two largest groups, if you were using this from an umbrella standpoint of saying, okay, well, there's a bunch that we could customize in here, but if we just started to go to market with like two main recommendations, what would they be? So we did the caring creatives, and we did these, where are you, gray there? The manager, right? So one group is deviating and leaning much more towards kind of social kind of interactions driven by people, very astute and able to listen to people, trust their gut, will make decisions on how they feel, greatly appreciate the aesthetics in a presentation, has all these little recommendations for action items and predictions and strengths and stuff. Those managers, almost kind of diametrically opposed, are way more focused on data and decision-making and process and proof, et cetera. And it's giving kind of the recommendations on what to say. And it's actually got a couple recommendations that are relatively split for authority and commitment, right? Authority for this is like based on that personality, cite a known professional or expert used in the field. Commitment is like setting up a freemium, like kind of a trial, if you will. So when we said, all right, well, from the surface, those two are your main two. And when you go to market, basically, I would have those two positions. Think of it as like your A and your B. We can automatically tag each user, which is which, and then you can have those kind of in the bank and then you'll be able to start to further break down if you want. We then went and did a very quick kind of personas exercise. And the personas, just like anyone else, we're doing this in a data-driven manner. But its job is to take everybody in your population and to, for lack of a better term, round them into 8 coherent and cohesive groups, right? Common groups. Innovators, early adopters, late adopters, early majority, et cetera, and give all of those custom recommendations based on each group. So they can go, okay, well, we have the umbrella 2, let's get more savvy using those 8. And it will kind of go through and it will give you your individual recommendations for like roles, targets, rebrand, and they're updated. This is when they're doing signals, customer satisfaction, et cetera. And each of those personas gets their individual recommendations, like their most common personality trait. We had to round some of those traits that drive this. So as an example, like extroversion is a big one associated with caring creatives. They round them to basically give you those most common traits. The innovators were way more into like B2B marketing. So a lot of the people that you see that are actually even probably speaking at this conference fall into this group. Go look, by the way, check our work. But brand innovators, people that are willing to scratch their own itch, very astute, understand aesthetics, great speakers, and triggers are oftentimes in B2B marketing and ABM type stuff. When we went in and we started digging into kind of the separate groups, we started going, wait a minute, we're starting to see less and less of kind of that manager population. We're seeing analytical learners. So, all right, cool. And this trait this phenomenon kind of continued. There's caring creative again. That one makes sense, right? We pull up and did another for early adopters, analytical learner again. We're going, wait a minute, these are traits like that manager and this analytical learner are both data-driven traits. They share a lot of common personality traits in terms of like number-driven types of individuals. Early majority, again, back to caring creative. So what you're seeing here is kind of a phenomenon, even coming from the bottom up, or when you actually have to use a lot of these tools. Here's your secret. Most companies, when they're doing kind of persona analyses, they start with data, they get some high level numbers, and then they start rounding and rounding and rounding and rounding and rounding before they almost don't mean anything. The AI in this case is building what's called a cluster analysis to start to basically recognize what are the most common traits and then make decisions based on, all right, what works most of the time? Because if someone has a lot of kind of extroverted tendencies, we want to lean towards that. But it may mean that we actually have to round them and they're in a slightly different personality category, like they're an analytical learner instead of a manager, because that matters more when we're clustering and we're trying to group people with similar traits. And the phenomenon that Chat Funnels is seeing here is kind of an interesting one. It's kind of a T-shaped data set. So, and like, they're actually seeing that on the front half of their adoption curve, on the people that are the more interesting subgroup for them to market and to actually have as customers, the caring creatives tend to actually be on the front end of that curve. They're managers and even they're reliable introverts. They expanded their population and it rounded. But they're actually seeing the data-driven and those people that are a little less extroverted that are much more evenly distributed across the entire curve, but therefore less adopted. So they can actually use this in a couple different ways where you can say, look, if it's me and you're in a category with a lot of adoption, and it's, this is stuff like ice cream where it's been around, nothing new. It may make the most sense to actually focus on that kind of manager / reliable introvert population. It's evenly distributed and it's a little bit across the entire curve. But if you're driving innovation and you're focusing on building those new things, those early adopters, those innovators, those caring creatives are actually more towards the front end of the curve. And actually, despite the two, if it's me, I would actually prioritize that caring creative population way more than I would the others. Even though at the umbrella level, it looks like it's basically half. And when you dig down, it actually becomes like, but there's actually some of those managers across the population. Not all users are created the same, and talking to them can net out very different responses, but you have to focus on what they want to hear and how you actually adapt to them when doing so. So, anyways, for what it's worth, remember that if nothing else, it's about what they hear, not what you say. And there's a lot of different ways these numbers can actually net out to make different recommendations on how you cut the data. So it's important to kind of pick and understand what you're working with so that you can actually build that repertoire, build that relationship with those people. So Thanks for your time again. I'm Dan. I'm with Wrench.ai. If you want to see more, if you want to chat more, if you have curious questions on your own populations, you want some other recommendations, you want to see more about what we do, or have other questions, hit me up, Dan at Wrench.ai, or hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm at Dan Baird there, and I would be happy to hear from you. Thank you. I appreciate your time. Cheers.